And good evening and welcome to Monday. It is Monday. It's Tuesday, as we used to call it. And welcome to the science fiction and fantasy general sort of chat-it thingy-majiggy-majiggy that we do on Mondays. So there we are. Welcome one and welcome all. It's always good to see you. So thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. It is, well, what time is it? It's 8 o'clock. Sorry I'm slightly late. We had a minor disaster in the chips department. This evening, we take turns in cooking food each day of the week. I normally do Tuesdays, just out of reference. Tuesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. And my youngest son is in charge of Mondays, and he forgot to do the chips, so we had a chip crisis. hence dinner was slightly late, hence everything else was slightly late, hence me getting to you was very slightly late, so I do apologise. It's entirely his fault, so nothing to do with me at all. Anyway, lovely to have you on the stream tonight. So so actually, well, it's been a couple of weeks, isn't it, since I've done one of these. This isn't good. So last week was a bank holiday in the UK, which is I don't know if bank holidays exist anywhere outside of the UK. It's a very curious holiday. Somebody along the line has decided, no, we're not going to do any banking today. Everyone's going to have a day off. I'm space chips. Yeah, they go with the space birds and space everything else. So I don't know. I must admit, I'm going to have to look it up now because I've just asked myself a question to which I don't know what the answer is, which is a very foolish thing to do in the public domain. I don't know what a bank holiday is all about. I mean, they're jolly good things to have. That's all I can say. So we celebrate. I don't think we celebrated banks. I don't think we celebrate banks. I mean, what is there to celebrate about a bank? But we basically don't have to go to work on a bank holiday in the UK, and we get I think we get 3 of them. I think there's and curiously there's one at the beginning of May, which we've just had. There's one at the end of May, which obviously will be coming up relatively soon, and there's one in August, and I have no idea why actually. So we get 2 days at Easter. We get Good Friday. I've never understood Good Friday either. I mean, from what I can understand, it's a pretty bad Friday, to be honest. If you happen to be the saviour of the world, it wasn't the best day. So I'm not quite sure what Good Friday is called. Good Friday, and obviously Easter. Easter Monday is fairly obvious. It's the Monday following Easter, and that makes sense. I'm not quite sure why that's a holiday as well. We get Christmas Day, Boxing Day, and New Year's Day, I think. So we get those are official days off in the UK. I think that's it. And I know different countries have different days for different things, but I have to say I have no idea why the ones in the UK are called the bank holiday. It's because it's Friday. Yeah, but obviously the Good Friday is a particular Friday, isn't it? We don't normally get Friday off. We have one Friday off a year, which is, and I assume it. I mean, I must admit, I don't actually know. But I assume it's the day, for Christians in particular, that Jesus is killed. Isn't that right? He's killed on Good Friday, nailed to the cross and dies rather horribly, and then comes back on Sunday. So why is it Good Friday? I don't know. So JL1988 says New Year's Day, Good Friday, Easter Monday, early May, late May, August, Christmas Day, Boxing Day, all bank. Yeah, so they're bank holidays. So why are the banks having holidays? I don't know. So maybe traditionally to pay. I mean, I don't know, Commander Ocon. That's a very good. I'm going to have to look it up. I'm going to look up why we call it. Maybe it's nothing to do with banks at all. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. Why don't I know? I should know. But anyway, we've literally. Dear, that's quite funny. I always. I must admit, I always like the Red Dwarf take on Mayday. It's like. With Chris Berry and going, he goes, why when we're in distress, why do we say Mayday? Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Why do we say that? Why don't we say Boxing Day, Boxing Day, Boxing Day, or Ascension Tuesday? Because Mayday, as in the distress call, is French. Mayday, which is aid me, help me. course, it sounds the same, which is quite funny. It's nothing to do with banks, obviously not. That would be far too easy, wouldn't it? So Alan's come in with a very, very, very sensible explanation there. We have May Day on the Monday nearest to May the 1st to prevent breaking up the working week, even when the 1st of May falls on a Friday. Okay. Glenn says, emergency Boxing Day. So I have to say, I don't know why any of those things are called what they're called, because thinking about it, I don't even know why Boxing Day is called Boxing Day. All this stuff I should know, and I don't. I'm standing here on the internet talking about these things, and I'm totally and utterly ignorant of the entire situation. I don't know where we go. So, anyway, a very, very long-winded way of apologising for not being here last week, because traditionally. It's a research stream. When I'm in when we're on holiday for whatever reason, I tend to sort of digital detox, I think is the phrase today. I just call it switching the computer off, which seems more accurate to me than a digital detox. But there we go. Anyway, so is there a waffle holiday? Actually, I must admit, I did fancy a waffle. Boxing Day, something to do with gifting boxes of stuff to poor people back in the day. Well, of course, we don't do that anymore. I'm gonna have, all these things, they need explanation, don't they? August Bank Holiday was designed to give workers a day off, I think. Okay, interesting. So anyway, sorry for not being here for this week, but I am here this week. So yeah, all is good. All is good with the world. Now, this this stream. Continues to be a resource, I kind of hope, for you guys. I'm hoping actually in upcoming streams to have some guests. So I'm going to go and try and arrange some guests. Now, a couple of them are to do with Doomdark's Revenge, which of course is my upcoming fantasy novel, for which I am currently editing. And they're going to hopefully one of them is and I haven't arranged this with them yet, so I'm being a bit presumptuous. But one of them is the person who owns the lore of the game and can talk about the kind of IP of these sort of thing. And the other one's actually the person who first won the game back in the 80s and actually won the prize. So I'm hoping to get them organised. I'm hoping to get a few other folks on as well in different writing capacities as well. So that would be quite good. There's one of the guests, your tea lady. I'm going to have to bring my lovely wife onto stream at some point. So yes, we'll have to do that too. My lovely tea lady. I don't think I better describe her like that. I'll be in all sorts of trouble. So how far is your Doomdarks edit? Well, today I have got to the end of chapter 13, I think. However, I've got a big long list of stuff that needs fixing now, which sort of started as I suspected at the end of chapter 10, because I had edited it a bit up to the end of chapter 10 before, and now I've got past down to chapter 13. I kind of fixed the English, but there's a few sort of structural things that have gone wrong. I've kind of got going to have to do some surgery there. So there we go. Jan, has Gareth L. Powell agreed to be a guest? Not yet. No, I'm going to hope he's one of the guys I'd like to see if I can get on the I almost said on the show. It's not really a show, is it? It's me. Me and my camera. But yes, he'd be one of the people I'd like to see if I could get on as well, and we'll have a chat about writing and stuff. And he's actually, I believe, just got one of his novels or a novel series is signed up to be turned into a TV series. So that's an interesting. I'd like to ask him some questions about that. So I think that could be quite an interesting topic of conversation. So we'll see. I shall extend invitations in due course. That would be really, really good. This stream is a nice writing getaway for me. Helps me feel connected. Excellent. Sevens were giving Boxing Day off to go home and give Christmas boxes to their family. Okay, there we go. We even learned some stuff. That's even good. That's good. I believe I'm right in saying he's got a TV contract. Or at least something's being produced. I'm not quite sure what the deal is. Embers of War. There we go. JR19 has confirmed it. So I must admit, the only thing I'm a bit nervous about, I haven't read that book yet. So I'm wondering if I should get it and read it quick before I invite him onto the show, because I don't know anything about it. So yes, that's probably a good idea, actually, thinking about it, isn't it? So it's always we're going to interview somebody, probably learn about what they do, I suspect. You better get the book before you have them. Yeah, I think so. Yes. Way Guys Waffle Time. That's what this one's called. So Doom Dance is going all right. I'm reasonably comfortable. I'll have a decent draft, a second draft of that in a month or so. So that's good. And I'll hope to have that out sort of probably late summer, I suspect now. And then, but my thoughts are already turning, and I've been using you guys as a sort of sounding board for my next sci-fi extravaganza, because I do want to do a space opera again. But I do want it, because it's going to be set in the Shadewood universe, I do want it to be that sort of semi-accurate. So all those things we've been talking about, I've been sort of scribbling away in the back of my head going, yes, okay, so what about the realistic physics there, and a bit of this, that and the other. We can chat Elite. Yes, Gareth L. he plays Elite as well. Awesome. Okay, so lots and lots of stuff in common, which is really, really good. So that's good fun. Send the book copy. I should do, shouldn't I? Yes. So you read these, and I'll read yours. How about that? Authors swapping books. That'd be quite cool. Does he wear a hat? Does he wear a hat? I'm not sure if he wears a hat, actually. Possibly. Maybe all sorts of things you could have in common. But so there'd be on the subject of hats. In fact, not on the subject of hats, but as a beard. Yeah, I don't think I can do that. Well, I probably can, but I don't think it's going to suit me having a beard. I think I'll just stick to the hat. He has a beard. Big distinguishing feature. He has a beard. So I believe he's got some cats as well. So I've got a cat. So there's enough to work with there, I think. So I haven't read Embers of War, I must admit. It's kind of, I think I should put it on my reading list. I've got a few books. I think I'm about down to 4 or 5 on my kind of pile at the moment. So maybe I can slot it in there and see if I can expedite it to the top of the reading list as fast as possible. Scottish flag on the top of my head today. Yes, so I'm not Scottish, or I'm not. In fact, I'm not even from this country at all. But I am Canadian by birth and British by kind of passport. And given everything that's happened with Brexit and everything, and I think I'm getting more inclined to try and be Scottish. So it was kind of like, yeah, you go Scotland. But yeah, my reading list is getting too long as well. So that's the thing. So my creative energies are beginning to be inclined towards a space opera again. So that will bring us on to tonight's topic. In do I speak French then? Un petit peu. You would be working. Well, I must admit, I do have a long-term plan potentially to move to Scotland, actually, for all sorts of reasons, from where I currently live, mostly because of too many people living in this part of the world. But we'll see how that goes. It may be a pipe dream, but we'll see. There's all sorts of possibilities. So I'm thinking of doing a space opera. I need to get back into my creative mode. Now I've kind of finished the creative bit of Doom Darks. The creative bit of my energy gets goes, oh yeah, come on, Drew, you need to work on something. My that part of my brain will definitely start requiring me to invent something, but I'm not quite sure what I want to do yet. I'm waiting for a massive dose of something to kind of occur, and that hasn't quite happened yet. I've got lots and lots of bits of ideas, but I haven't got a comprehensive, cohesive adventure planned in my head yet, which I need to kind of work out. So that's going to be interesting to see where that goes. So that's kind of next thing. I am working through. I am working through the audiification of Shadewood Expiation at the moment, so I've literally that's how far I've got. Okay, so the fat bit is the bit. That bit there. The fat bit is the bit that I've done, and that bit's the bit I've still got to read. So I'm getting there. I'm about 2/3 of the way through the read of Shadewood Expiation in terms of audiobook generation. So that's another thing that's kind of going on at the moment. And then I've got the last, and then I've got to go do editing on that. So everything ends up in editing, which is. Yeah. I need to have a good talk with my dog for inspiration. Actually, my dog isn't as good for inspiration as it used to be because it can't handle long walks anymore. Poor dear. I don't know, some of you may have seen it on Twitter. It's my lovely Labrador, Lizzie is the name of her name. She's 13, just last week, and that's quite old for a Labrador. In fact, the average for the type of Labrador she's a chocolate brown Labrador. Which means she's very, very short on intelligence, but very, very high on good looks, as dogs go. And the average life expectancy for a chocolate Labrador apparently is only 10.7 years, so she's at 13 and still doing all right. But she's, shall I say, she's not very active anymore. So she doesn't, she doesn't like long, well, she can't really manage long walks anymore. Which is a bit of a shame because that's usually where I get my inspiration is a decently long walk where I get away from everybody, except for the dog. Animals are cool for that sort of thing, and I need lots of peace and quiet to get some inspirational ideas. But get a trailer for your bike so she can. I could try that. Going to be very strange. I'm just taking the dog for a bike ride. So you could just sit with the doggy and she'll give you inspiration. Well, she is quite good, but she does. The problem is, being an older dog, for those of you who know what dogs are like when they get old, she does make some rather odd noises. Some of which are accompanied by interesting smells. So yeah, that can tend to put a small cork in the creative juices at times. So yeah, poor old dear, but she's a lovely old hound, but she is very old now. So there we go. So yeah, so that's something I'm working on. I've kind of set my subconscious to start thinking about it. I've got plenty of ideas, but at the moment, quite a lot of them come back, and I've gone, no, that's a bit too derivative. I did come up with an idea of a sort of. I was getting quite excited by actually a sort of humans versus genetically engineered humans kind of war. And then I thought, no, it's kind of Battlestar Galactica. It's kind of been there. It's kind of, maybe there's a bit of time travel involved. No, I'm not going to do time travel. So, all those sort of things. And at the moment, they're all coming back with, no, I've seen that before. I've seen that movie. Kind of, no, I'm not sure about that. So, so I haven't the big, for those of you who read my Shadewood saga, I try and not do the obvious. Story, so I don't want to do something that somebody else has already done, and that's the bit that hasn't quite landed for me yet. So I'm going to have to wait and see. I've heard that one before. It's the dog, honest. Which chapter are you putting that bit of inspiration in? You need to use all your senses when writing. That's very true. But it's a bit more distracting when you're trying to look at for inspiration. But there we go. So things are progressing. What I'm trying to do is I want to clear the backlog. Actually, in terms of audiobooks, I want to do Lords of Midnight and Doomnox Revengers audiobooks as well. So I've got quite a lot more recording to do there. That'll probably take me most of the rest of the year to get that recorded. And then I want to finish Doomnox obviously as a book and get that out. So that's my immediate thing. And then the decks are clear for creative extra works and all that kind of good stuff, which should be good. So so there may be some guest speakers coming up. There may be some other bits and pieces around there as well, which is quite good. You always say your characters are story driven. So do you have characters developing already? I do have some characters. Okay, so this is very, very minor spoil. I haven't come up with any names and I haven't come up with anything specific, but what I am toying with is the thing that keeps coming back to me is I want there to be a central theme about the core of humanity itself, and I want because basically what's happening in the Shadewood universe outside of the Shadewood world that we've already been on is that we're about 1,500 years in the future, and on the Shadewood planet obviously technology regressed, but we do know that they had some sort of genetic engineering capabilities which they applied. And then the people on that planet lost their technology, and everything kind of regressed. And that's that planet. But the assumption for the space opera set in the Shadewood universe is that other planets retained their technological knowledge and moved on from that perspective. So what I'm playing around with is, okay, where did they go? Where did they get to? And where does that leave humanity? What are we actually dealing with? Are we dealing with a race of superhumans? Are we dealing with machine intelligence? Are we dealing with AI? Well, what are we dealing with? And I quite like the idea of some sort of schism between different branches of humanity on different worlds. And so I haven't really got any characters yet, but something that keeps coming back to me is having a character who is actually kind of purely human in a universe where virtually nobody else is, because they've all been augmented or genetically modified, or the physiology's changed simply because of where they live, and that's that's about as far as I've got, and I'm sort of mucking about with that idea in my head a little bit at the moment to see where that goes. So I don't know, I'm not sure at the moment. Have I got any characters per se? No, I haven't. But I've got some ideas. I do want to pick up some space opera themes, so I want a ship, and I want a crew, and I want some daring do adventures and some conflict and all that kind of good stuff. That's got to be in there, but that's not quite where I'm starting. So we'll have to wait and see. So it's early days. It's still in the very kind of creative murks of the back of my mind, which is a very odd place to be. So there we go. That's kind of the only other thing I have done this week. For those of you who are in the UK, I'm a bit kind of like, ooh, we can do this again. A hero called Declan O'Connor sounds like a great idea. What a fantastic suggestion, Mr. O'Connor. We'll have to wait and see. I've signed up to go to Lavecon. So for those of you who are of an Elite Dangerous flavour, you'll probably know of Lavecon, but it's kind of it's probably the most specific elite. Well, actually, no. There's two really. There's Elite Meet, which is the name is kind of in the title, which hasn't taken place this year because that one typically took place early in usually March, April, and it's just too early because of COVID. Whereas Lavecon is in July, and with a bit of luck and the following wind and everything going to plan, the UK will be out of its COVID restrictions by that point in time. So at the moment, it's all there to go ahead. So if you are into Elite Dangerous and you like conventions and meeting other nerdy people, most of which aren't too alarming, to be fair, then Lavecon is definitely the place to go. So I think it's Northampton. So I've signed up for that. It's in the same place as ever it is. It's Sedgebrook Hall Hotel in North Hants. I think. I mean, I just type the number into my sat nav and follow the computer. I'm not very good at that sort of thing. But for me, it's a bit up north, but it's not very far up north. It's past London and north a bit. It's not very far away. It's from anywhere that is actually probably up north. It'll be south. So anyway, so I'm going to be there. So if you do want to meet me in person, Lavecon, you can do so if you can get there. So that can't be good. It does get booked up. Yeah. So they've got I don't think they've got a. They certainly, in terms of the hotel rooms that are there, they get booked up very, very fast. I'm staying at a hotel just around the corner because A, it's cheaper, B, I could get a space. North Hants isn't north, no, not at all. I mean, it's just called North Hants because it's not north, like most things in the UK. Bit south for me, 650 odd miles on the ferry. Yes, it's a long old way if you're up in Scotland, that's for sure. The only con I've been to is the Frontier Expo. Okay, so I was at the Frontier Expo actually, so that was good. So conventions are a thing of their own actually. I mean, Lavecon actually is pretty good. It's pretty friendly, and it's not just Elite. There's obviously got quite a big Elite focus. We've had some of the developers for Elite Dangerous turn up at Lavecon and say things, which is quite good. So if you're in the UK or striking distance of the UK, I can definitely recommend it, and I will see you there, commanders. That would be quite good. So that was another thing I did this week, which was good. Yeah, it's probably going to be tricky internationally with travel and stuff, I would have thought, at this point in time. So we'll have to wait and see how it goes. But at least things are heading in the right direction, and things are clearing up. That's good. So as usual on this stream, obviously I've been waffling now for 29 minutes. Is that a record? Possibly not quite, but it's pretty close. Feel free at any stage, my friends, to dump in a question on writing in general. I'm more than happy to stop whatever it is that I am actually trying to do to answer specific questions, because one of the things that has helped me out over the years is being able to ask somebody who's potentially got a bit further than I have, well, how do you do that then? So at any stage on this stream, if you have a question about writing or editing or the idea of creating a book, or where do you get ideas from, and how do you do this, how do you do that, feel free to chuck those into the chat, and I will do my best to answer them, and so on and so forth. So Empress Kildrum, I've got this awful disease where I can't stop telling airport jokes. The doctor's terminal. That's dreadful. I like it. Steve, now guys, stop it. Have you got the second opinion? I feel as diagnosis is playing wrong. Ah, dear. So if you do have questions, feel free to chuck them in. Now my topic is one that has been delayed considerably, for reasons of other stuff happening, because I did want to talk about guns, not specifically just guns, but sort of kind of pew pew really in science fiction settings. And we have discussed on this stream before the big stuff, like planet killing weapons and Death Star rays and all that kind of stuff. But lower level than that is all the sort of gun type technology. Okay, so there's a bit of pew pew. Yeah, and I like a bit of pew pew, to be fair. In science fiction, in particular, because it's of interest to me, for various reasons. Because in the future there's still going to be conflict. At least that's an assumption that I'm going to make. That's an interesting thing. So anyway, a few questions popped in. Right, so would you say you're the best at sci-fi, or is there a genre you don't like writing that you think you're better at? I tend to stick to the ones I like. I think it's generally, I would always give a writer the advice that only write things that you want to read. Don't try and write something that you don't want to read, if that makes sense. So whilst I quite enjoy crime novels, I don't think I could write one. I don't think I'd be very good at it. And I wouldn't enjoy writing one. It'd be complicated. So I like writing science fiction and fantasy. So I tend to sort of just graduate to that. Those are the genres that really interest me the most. So that's where I write. So I tend to stick with that if I were you. Personally, I'm working on a setting that in some ways you could call derivative. Nothing individual is very. It's hard to be original, to be honest, Chris. It is very difficult, and inspired by a lot of things. I think even my Shadewood stuff. I'm not the first person to set an adventure on a tidally locked planet around a known exoplanet. Even that is not specific enough to be original. So I think what I've done with it is probably relatively original, but again, it's some of the dialogue, some of the characters, some of the situations are going to be derivative of other things. It's virtually impossible to be totally original. I've had situations where people have gone. I mean, actually, what I was most miffed about, for those of you who remember Elite Reclamation, I wrote for those of you who read it, there's a scene in there in the wedding where basically the wedding starts taking place and then everyone gets shot to pieces and slaughtered. And I genuinely wrote that before I saw the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. And I remember watching the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones thinking, damn, everyone's going to assume I'm ripping this off. And I genuinely hadn't ripped it off. But of course I hadn't published the book by that point. So I was like, what do I do now? And I just kind of went, oh, well, solid, I'm just going to have to go with it. But I generally remember thinking, damn. That's exactly the same, pretty much, word for word, as I'd imagined mine, and I hadn't seen it. It's just one of those characters where you came up with the same idea as somebody else. So, and the Red Wedding, there we go, is based on real events, of which I also don't know anything about. So that would be interesting too. So all that sort of stuff. It's sometimes you just get unlucky, and it's very difficult to be 100% original. And it's not wrong to be inspired or to ape things that you've read. I mean, I read lots and lots of science fiction, and some of those ideas I go, oh, that's such a great idea. I really want to explore that a bit more and something like my own. Go do it. You mix it up, you'll create something new. All that sort of stuff. Find your own voice in it, because your characters are different, your situations can be different, even if it is similar. And in some ways, from a sales perspective, having something that's similar to something else actually is a good thing, because everyone goes, oh, it's a sort of in the vein of famous writer over there. Oh, great, I'll give it a try then. That kind of thing that can be quite good. So Glenn's got the other one. Scientific discoveries, those wretched facts. Always get in the way of a good science fiction novel. Stop discovering stuff that makes my story not work. Busted scientists. It's really quite. I was worried actually when I was writing Shadewood that there would be some discovery in the Lakai 9352 system, which is where my story is set, that would basically rule the entire thing out of commission. Really, that hasn't fortunately happened yet, but it could do in the future. There we go. So yes, the amount of times I've had to change something about my work in progress because a scientist discovered those wretched scientists with their facts and their hypotheses and their theories. What do they know anyway? Yes, it's quite hard to stick to that sometimes when new stuff's being discovered all the time, which is quite good. Exactly, erroneous gaming, blasted facts. Stop getting in the way of a decent story. It's Game of Thrones in space. Well, I suppose in some ways my second Elite book was a bit Game of Thrones in space, not really quite, but those kind of political shenanigans, I quite like that sort of stuff. So there we go. But so Pew Pew. Let me get back on this. So handguns and things in space. Now, it's interesting to compare how different franchises have done this. So if you look at some of the 80s stuff, you've got Star Wars, obviously, with blasters, the generic sort of blasters. You've got Chewbacca's sort of crossbowy thing, which I never really understood. Why does a space crossbow exist? I mean, I suppose I kind of get the idea of a blaster, which is kind of like a pistol, and then maybe a kind of rifle thing, which gives you a bit more accuracy and maybe a bit more power. But it's sort of it's obviously driven off the need to be very, very accessible to people who are familiar with kind of westerns, okay, where you would have revolving pistols and rifles and stuff. And Blake 7, of course, yeah. So that we'll get on to Blake 7. So to me, Star Wars is a western in space. So blasters are just like pistols, just with effectively an inexhaustible power supply. And I'm not quite sure, in Star Wars, of course, they're called blasters, and they fire a bolt of something which travels at a speed that you can see. So it's not made of light, is it? It's not a laser beam. And actually the ships have similar things, don't they? The beams of light, or the beams of stuff, whatever Star Wars energy is composed of, clearly isn't light in the normal sense, because you can see it coming and dodge it. So it sort of has that tracer fire type thing, and George Lucas obviously watched a lot of World War II movies when he was doing the original Star Wars, and I kind of, and that aesthetic works rather well in in a sort of light space opera, which of course Star Wars is in terms of its adherence to, it's very space opera. The blasters have they seem to have a range, and the things that they fire, whether those things are bolts of energy or whatever they happen to be, bolts of plasma, who knows what they are. They travel at a relatively low speed actually, so it's possible to dodge them, even on the ground. So when you're firing your blaster in the Star Wars universe, you can see the bolt of whatever it is move away from you, and if you're quick, you have to be pretty quick. You can get out of the way of it. And obviously with with the Jedi, are able to sort of see it coming, and they can use their lightsabers to deflect the bolts or absorb them and do stuff like that. So, but it's very much a sort of replacement for pistols and rifles, in my view. Is they kind of work in the same way. So you can have those sort of Western standoff moments where they're just sort of and everyone's ducking for cover and rolling around and trying to get some it's fun, but it is basically a Western, but with just high tech stuff. So that I think is quite. The original Battlestar Galactica was very, very similar. So they had kind of blaster guns, and they fired they just had a pulse of light, which seemed to, I don't think they had any beams as far as I remember, but the handheld weapons anyway. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Maybe they did. Maybe they were yellow. Similar sort of thing to Star Wars. Really, very, 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 very similar. They don't seem to be very accurate, especially the Empire. One thing I never understood about Star Wars, is that the poor Empire clones, the actual army, the stormtroopers, have to wander around in the big, heavy, quite cumbersome armor that they wear, with the helmet and the white get-up. Okay, now that armor seems to be entirely useless. It doesn't matter. You shoot a stormtrooper once, they're down. What is the point of the armor? I mean, if it could take 4 or 5 shots and then one of the bolts gets through, then I would say yes, the armor is definitely worth wearing. But I don't think I can recall ever seeing a stormtrooper basically survive a shot. So the question to me is, why are they wearing the armor? Does it have any practical purpose at all? Because you're in this helmet, and I don't know I've never worn a stormtrooper helmet, but I can imagine your visibility is quite badly restricted in that helmet. I have worn a motor racing helmet, and that constricts your vision, and that looks much, much, much better than the stormtrooper helmet. So I don't quite get what the stormtrooper armor is all about. Is it energy dissipation or that? So maybe there's some deep lore. It's a pleasing aesthetic just to make them look intimidating, and they do look pretty intimidating. That's all quite good. Simple stone could kill a stormtrooper. Well, that's probably true. So so that's what I've never understood. But weapons in Star Wars, and the weapons in Star Wars are very, very odd, really, because. And actually, Elite Dangerous is going to suffer from this, I think, with Odyssey, is that you've kind of got guns at point that have really, really low ranges. Okay, so all the combat on the ground in Star Wars takes place at point blank range. It seems there's some galaxy spanning law that basically says you're not allowed to use any kind of tactical long range weapon other than a Death Star. And every single battle must be conducted by massed armies on the ground at close range. There's no real proper bombing, other than when there is. These massive on foot armies with weird and wonderful machines, which look very, very cool but are completely nonsensical. Because why don't you just bomb the hell out of the planet? With otherwise the entire everything is covered in ground troops. It's just really, really weird. So, regarding the accuracy issue, that's one thing I appreciate about Stargate, where one episode they addressed Helm why the Jafar staff weapons were so inaccurate. Staff weapon is a weapon of terror meant to intimidate your enemy. And the P90 is a weapon of war meant to kill your enemy. That's fair enough. I don't mind that quite so much. I'm no long range weapons, but I'm a sharpshooter. What am I going to do? Well, this is the thing, you see, in Star Wars, if you want to invade a planet, you have to land on the planet and then you have to walk to the enemy base. Either in a machine or just on foot. Just like, okay. That's not the way I would do it. And I think Elite Dangerous is going to suffer from this a bit, because you've got this situation where you have spaceships that are ridiculously overpowered, which can fly around maintaining total air superiority over a relatively small base, and yet it's still going to be important for guys on foot to wander around shooting each other. So I just okay, we'll have to wait and see. So so lots of things about that don't make it makes for a great visual spectacle. Okay, Star Wars is. I mean, I'm just thinking about things like Attack of the Clones, and all that sort of. It's like, why are you spending all your time sending in small munitions and mini tanks and things when actually you've got the Star Destroyer in orbit? It doesn't make any sense. Imperial Legion lets advance very slowly towards the enemy, exactly, under cover of daylight. And things like the Expanse are different. Yeah, so we'll get to the Expanse. So Battlestar, the original Battlestar Galactica and Star Wars, very much westerns in space. So the old idea of having a pistol shootout across a street with some cover, just transported into space, as far as I can work out, with the kind of thing, and it works. Very, very simple tech. Robots with guns. Small tanks with guns and very, very short range weapons. There seems to be a law in the Star Wars universe that on the ground you're only allowed to use short range weapons of limited power. You can make a nice explosion that will kill 10, 15 people all in one hit, but that's the biggest munition you're allowed to deploy by some decree. I don't know what it is. That's just Star Wars. So there's no tactical nukes or anything in the Star Wars universe, so it would seem. So that's the thing. So that's the old one. Now go back a bit further into the past. Of course, in the 1950s, everything was a ray gun, of some description. So I'm thinking of the original Battlestar, the original Flash Gordons and things, the black and white stuff. You'd have ray guns of some description, and those would tend to be kind of energy emitting things, electromagnetic pulse guns or something along those lines, which would be quite interesting and of course limited by the special effects of the time, or things that just made things spark and explode and stuff. So there's a concept of a ray gun, something that emitted rays, and in fact when you get to Star Trek in the 60s, and they understood by that point, the sci-fi advisors on the show basically said you can't have the weapons being lasers, because the audience is going to be savvy enough to realise that lasers can't do the thing that you're saying that they can do, because they know now that the laser is not able to do what that thing's doing. So the word phaser for Star Trek came in because phasers can obviously do things that lasers can't do, and so they renamed it something else to get around that problem, which is quite good. They had ray guns in the 50s because that's what the real aliens were using, yes. So I'm not sure what's happening in the Star Wars universe to prevent certain size munitions happening on ground forces, but there's obviously some kind of Geneva Convention. You're not allowed to use bombs beyond a certain capacity, except in space. So there doesn't seem to be any concept of air superiority a lot of the time in Star Wars. It's like, no, we'll just have a pitched battle on the ground, sir, and everyone's agreed to this, have they? Yes. And nobody's going to cheat. No. It's going to be totally above board. So there are some oddities in those sort of things. Because you see in some, if, for example, in Rogue One, there is a concept of air superiority which kind of works, and then anti-aircraft defences and all sorts of things. But it's very World War II-ish, which is a thing which George Lucas obviously liked. So there are things like that. So, and Star Trek brought in phasers. Now phasers are quite neat. So I think this did move the game on a little bit, because phasers have the ability to disintegrate things, i.e. just make them vanish, which is obviously quite convenient for special effects because you could just filter them out with a frame. Or stun. Stun's quite a good thing. Your gun has, if you want to be all moral and you want to interrogate your victim after the event, rather than killing him outright, you can stun him with your phaser, set phasers to stun, which gives you the ability to potentially capture the opponent and then do something nefarious to them afterward, which is quite cool. And at least Star Trek weapons in general, not all the time because they sometimes do it wrong, but most of the time the phaser is a beam of energy, which is kind of, it doesn't quite work like a laser because obviously you can see it, but at least it goes in a straight line, and it seems to be virtually instantaneous at the point of view it arrives. So if you're pointing at somebody and you're on target, you will hit them. You can't dodge a phaser. The only way you can dodge a phaser is if the other person misses. So so that's a subtle distinction which I think Star Trek has done quite well with. But sometimes phasers don't travel as fast as they should. I'm thinking of things like the Wrath of Khan, where the Enterprise is firing on that. Now that's a great movie, but the phasers are wrong in that film. Because you see them go sort of Star Wars style. You go, no, that's not what a phaser looks like. Stop it. And in the new Star Trek, the J.J. Abrams stuff, the phasers are wrong in that as well. They turn back into Star Wars weaponry for some strange reason. So all of those sort of things. So phasers can do, unfortunately, sometimes whatever it is that the writer requires them to do, which is a bit of a shame. But they're a little bit more sophisticated, I think, than the Star Wars weaponry. And I like the idea of the phasers, having the stun setting and the different intensities, which means you can try and do things, and you can set your phaser to overload as well, which is quite cool. You could dodge a phaser if Worf was firing it, so that's quite good. And some of the others now, quite rightly, we should take the Mickey out of Blake 7 at this point. So for those of you who are not British, you possibly may not even know of Blake 7, but Blake 7 was the BBC's, the British Broadcasting Corporation. You basically attempt to kind of compete with probably 1,000th of the budget with things like Star Trek and Star Wars. And to be honest, what they did is they didn't really major on special effects because there wasn't any money to do so. They did their best with what they had, but it is strings and bits of cotton candy and fiberglass in space. What they did do is they did write quite an interesting story. So the story of Blake 7 is actually that the universe, the Earth is the centre of a federation, but it's not a nice federation like in Star Trek. It's a evil kind of corporate, overbearing 1984 style federation where everything's under surveillance, and you have to have drugs to keep you in line, all that kind of stuff. So it's very oppressive, and there's a bunch of misfit criminals, basically, according to the Federation, who basically escape and find this alien spaceship and go on being freedom fighter stuff. And the crew is engagingly dysfunctional, which makes it very, very different tone to Star Trek, where everyone it's all we work to better ourselves and there isn't any money, whereas in Blake 7 it's no, greed is good, and I'm only keeping you guys alive because it's it's good for me. So Blake 7 had some very cool writing. It had some very, very poor special effects, however, particularly by modern standards. But it is quite endearing. But the one thing I did like is that the Blake 7 gun it's basically what it basically is a they have it on their belt, and you pull it out and point it at the person, and it's 3 consecutive transparent rings and a pointy bit, and it literally just lights up, accompanied by a sort of bzzz sound, and it looks like a curling tong, and it lights up and goes bzzz like that, and there's no special effect other than the fact that it's got a light in it. So forget the beams of energy or anything like that. And if you get hit by one of these things, all you have to do is go like that and fall on the ground. And quite what the I don't even do the Blake 7 do the Blake 7 weapons have a name? I don't know if they do. Is it a disintegrator or something? I don't know what it is. Maybe somebody will know. But the one thing I did like about them is that they're the only weapon I can think of where actually the weapon actually has a power pack that you have to wear, and it's it's connected by a telephone cord. For those of you who are old enough to remember telephone cords, you had the handset and the receiver, and between the handset receiver and the actual telephone was a spirally cord like that. The Blake 7 weapons had the spirally cord connecting them to a box that you had to wear out. But the idea that the weapon itself needed a supplementary power supply, I thought was actually quite a good one, because one of the things that you have to consider is is okay. These guns, if you think of a pistol, okay, the energy in the lethal part of a pistol is obviously the bullet, okay, or the shell, depending on how you want to describe it. Okay, so the shell contains gunpowder, and when you hit it, you fire it, and obviously the thing explodes, and the bullet then shoots out the front of the gun at high speed, which is why it's dangerous. Now, with a revolver you maybe get 6 shots. With some of the others you can get 10 or 12, or I don't know what the maximum number of bullets you can have in a handgun is, but it's certainly limited. Okay, so that's the thing. Now, with a hand laser gun of some kind, or a blaster, you do have to ask your questions. Okay, well, where is it getting its power from, and how much power can it store in of itself? And there's also the discharge thing. Now, unless you're whatever it is that makes the bolt of whatever it is isn't 100% efficient, there's going to be kind of there's a backlash. There's not going to be recoil in the classic sense. So there you are. Burrito says, Commander O'Connor, 18 9mm rounds. Okay, so 18, 12, 24, that sort of number seems to be realistic for a handgun, because you've got to have somewhere physical to store the weapon, the ammunition. One thing that really surprised me about handguns the first time I played with a real one was how heavy they are. Because you don't necessarily think it, because of course when you're on TV they're just shooting away. But when I actually fired a handgun, I was like, this thing actually weighs quite a lot. And holding it at arm's length is. So my aim is starting to sag, because the gun's actually kind of heavy, because it's a big chunk of it. Has to be made of metal, right? Because it's got to be quite strong. So the question is, your phaser or your blaster or whatever it is, the energy density that's in that thing has to be pretty impressive to make a lethal blast of something. Now, of course, it's science fiction, so you can kind of make up any energy source you like. But the Blake 7.1 did seem to make sense to me, in the sense that you could have this belt which was actually the power supply for the gun, and the gun itself, to be lightweight, I suppose, didn't actually have the power mechanism in itself. It was literally just the delivery mechanism, and the Blake 7 gun literally just lit up and went zzz, but and there was no beam. Now that's obviously mostly because of special effects, but actually in some cases, if it was a laser gun, it was kind of realistic, because you wouldn't see a laser because lasers don't show up most of the time. So there's lots of little bits and pieces like that you can play with. Is that a realistic gun or not? So a good friend of mine shared medicinal cigarettes, says Karumba, with the Supreme Commander. Ooh, wow! In their flat when she was looking for a flat to stay during the Edinburgh. Wow. Okay, that's a claim to fame. Sharing recreational cigarettes from Serverland. And they're getting lighter, says Kamakichi. Yes, so guns made of modern materials can get lighter. So that's interesting. So there's the energy density thing. Now, I think in science fiction you can pretty much make up what you like, but I think if you're writing a story, I wouldn't recommend having a laser gun of some description that has effectively an infinite power supply, because that doesn't sound realistic to me. And you do want the idea of, rather like a handgun. You don't want to go all unrealistic on the handgun, because you quite often see, even today, sort of TV shows and not so well written films, where the bad guys or the good guys have handguns, and it's like bang 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 bang. And my sons and me make a great joy of counting the number of shots the handgun has. It's like, that's got at least 40. How does that work? Before they reload, or sometimes they never reload at all, or maybe they reload off screen so you can't see it, but all those sort of things. And then there's the recoil, of course. So the recoil is a thing as well that a physical gun has, which a laser shouldn't have. Now, interesting enough, in Star Wars, occasionally you do see a bit of recoil from the blaster, because and this is the question, I don't know in the Star Wars universe what the energy stuff that's coming out of the blaster is. It doesn't appear to be light, it's something else, because it appears to have recoil. And quite often you see the big guns in Star Trek. You can see the sort of anti-aircraft type guns, and they go jung 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 jung. It's like they're recoiling. So, but aren't they firing energy bolts? Because energy doesn't have any mass, so there shouldn't be any recoil. So that's a bit weird. And actually, oddly enough, Elite Dangerous had this. One of my streams just the other week, I was firing a laser gun and carving my initials into a rock in space because that's what you do, right? And my laser gun, or my laser blaster thing, whatever it is, had had recoil. I was like trying to scratch my head as to why a laser gun would have recoil. So phaser, there we are. Phased array pulsed energy projectile weapon. That's the scientific explanation. So I'm not sure. I don't. A laser doesn't have any recoil. Okay, so whether a phaser has any recoil depends on the nature of the beam it's emitting. But I'd be very surprised if a beam of energy has any recoil. If it's a blaster and it blasts a bolt of something, then maybe that bolt of something is actually maybe plasma or something like that, and maybe that has got some mass. But I would be very surprised if it had enough mass to be as noticeable as a bullet. So maybe there's some action inside the gun causing a recoil. I mean, yeah, there's possibly some stuff. Who knows? There's lots of moving parts in our gun. So there's some complexities there. And Star Wars lasers could be superheated rail. We don't really know. I think again the lesson there is if you're going to have a gun, either do it for just the special effects and fun, but do think through the way it works and have limitations to it as well. So a hand laser gun that has infinite ammo is probably not great. So lasers in sci-fi don't have recoil. What you see is the weapons cringing on behalf of the scientists. So lasers shouldn't have any. A true laser shouldn't have any recoil. Now, the flip side of that is a laser actually is a laser a good weapon to have? Okay. Now, what's a laser going to do if it hits something? This is what's quite interesting. Is depending on the type of laser. Lasers certainly at high energy concentrations can cut through things. Okay. But to cut through something, quite effectively, normally lasers have to be on that target, and the target has to be nice and stationary to get a good kind of impact. Now, if you fire even a high-powered laser at an object that's moving, the chances of you getting a good solid drillable hole through the thing are relatively low because it's quite hard unless you've got very, very, very good tracking. It's quite hard to keep your laser on target for long enough to do damage to whatever it is that you're thinking. And there's very quite effective ways to defeat lasers, and that's to have mirrors on the outside of your ship. Now, a very, very high power laser will cut through a mirror, but it'll take quite a long time to do it depending on what the mirror is constructed of, because the vast amount of the energy is reflected off. Okay, that's what mirrors do. So then there's different types of lasers. You could hit them with different types of energy. So heat is potentially quite a good one, because what you could do with heat is just cook the the pilots of the ship, rather than trying slicing the ship up and hoping to hit a vulnerable spot. Just heat the thing up using an infrared laser. That might be a more effective strategy. But you're going to have quite a lot of time on target in order to do that in kind of vaguely realistic space. Super powerful lasers will insta kill you if they cut it. The more power you can throw at it, but with power comes a problem, because lasers are not 100% efficient. Nothing is no matter what you try and do. And in space, you've always got the problem of dealing with all the excess heat that all of these weapons generate. So if you have a super high power weapon, then you have the problem of excess heat. So it's very easy to cook yourself when you're on the offensive when you're using a laser. And so it may not be. With great power comes great responsibility. So it may not be the best way to attack. It may be a weapon that's almost as dangerous to you, because as you're firing it, assuming let's say you miss a few times because the other guy is trying to do some evasive maneuvers, you're still absorbing all that heat into your spaceship because the laser gun is attached to your ship. And that heat is quite hard to get rid of in space because there's nothing to conduct it away. The only way to get rid of heat in space is to radiate it out, or to use maybe something like a heat sink in Elite Dangerous. So I don't know. So all those things are slightly problematic for lasers in space. Now, yeah, you've got to balance that in movies between giving something familiar to people to cue off. That's why so many space movies, and we've discussed this before and we joked about it. So many space movies, when the spaceship comes across the screen, it makes a sort of rumbling noise. You've always seen it. Where's my little? Hang on. Where's my little Enterprise thing? There it is. No, that's not it. There's a car. When there we go. It's very small. It's my pin badge. When the Enterprise comes across the screen like that, it makes a sort of noise. And the bigger your ship is, the deeper sort of rumble it makes. Because spaceships rumble. I don't know. We kind of have this impression that big engines on the back of ships, and things like the Battlestar Galactica with the great big glowing exhaust and all that, make a rumbly noise. No, they don't. They might inside the ship, I suppose, but they certainly wouldn't. If you were an astronaut sitting in a spacesuit filming the ship from outside, there would be no sound. But that's a convenience that a lot of films have. Star Trek has done it, Star Wars has done it. All those sorts of things. For kind of, and when ships fire in space, we get that kind of choo, 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 sort of pew pew, don't we? We get the pew pew sound, which we're all very, very familiar with, which of course is complete nonsense because lasers don't make any sound when they go off. So quite why we got that. Where do those sounds come from? Who decided that that's what a space laser weapon sounds like? Because they don't. Nothing sounds like that. That's somebody somewhere must have hit some combination of settings on an analog synthesizer sometime back in the 40s and the 50s and gone, that sounds really cool. That sounds like a gun. You could do it on modern synthesizers. So somewhere along the line, somebody decided that was what a sound a space laser makes. Of course, they don't make any sound at all. So that one's quite weird. This is because spacesuit helmets have speakers and integrated CPU that creates the sounds the human brain is not confused. See, that's a solution that's just looking for all sorts of ways to exploit it. Mobax says, I need to stop watching this. You're ruining all my childhood memory. Yeah, so we do this quite a lot. We take apart old photos and mercilessly rip into them. So that's an interesting thing. So weapons like that. They're very stylized and they're very much set for the kind of thing. So a lot of it is westerns in space. And one show, of course, that really went, what we're going to have is we're going to have westerns in space, and we're just going to keep it with western guns. So and Firefly, dear old one season Firefly that we're never going to forgive them for cancelling. Basically, we've got spaceships. Yeah, spaceships are cool. So their spaceships are super high tech, and they've got kind of incredible technology. What sort of guns will the high tech spaceship people have? They'll have Colt 45s. Really? Yeah. We're just going to have ordinary guns. Okay. No, like super ray guns. No. Not doing ray guns. Just guns. Okay, so it's a western in space then, basically. Yes, it exactly is a western in space. And the ultimate thing is, of course, you end up with Vera, which is my very favourite gun. With a triple bore auto lock thingamajiggy, whatever it is he said. And I remember watching this. I love Firefly, okay, because the humour in the writing is very, very good. But it's a space western. How do you know that? Well, it's the only thing that's different between it and a normal western is they have a spaceship. Everything else is exactly the same. That's quite funny. Now, but I think in some ways Firefly is actually rather sensible, because the good thing about guns, okay, traditional guns, i.e. bullets, is that they work. Okay, they're relatively simple devices. They're very lethal, but they're pretty easy to manufacture. So I think actually it makes quite a lot of sense, particularly if you're most of the time on a planet where there is an atmosphere, in which case the gun will work, at least with an oxygen atmosphere. And they do make reference to that in one episode. They have to use Vera to shoot in space, and they have to put the gun in a suit in order to fire it, which is good, which is good science. Whether that would actually work, I'm not sure, but the idea of actually we're sticking with guns because they're simple and they're cheap. That kind of makes sense, So if you've got, if it kills somebody, it's doing its job, right? It doesn't need to be a flashy high-tech laser gun, which is expensive to build and very complicated. Something low-tech like a normal revolver or a handgun or whatever it happens to be. Maybe that is the right answer because it's just simple, and particularly in the Firefly universe where everything is kind of certainly on the outskirt planets, everything's kind of breaking down and quite lawless and anarchic anyway. You're going to use whatever you can get hold of, okay, to enforce your rule of law, whatever you want to call it. And that in that context, I think it's just normal guns. Yep, okay, just normal guns. So that kind of, I think, does make some sense. And Firefly actually touches on that. Is when you encounter the high tech places, the security guards are wandering around with these sort of weird stun weapons that make a sort of ripple in the air, and that's what they do. Whereas our heroes, our kind of anti-heroes, if you like, are using normal handguns, which they shoot and have bullet wounds and all this sort of stuff. So Argonne Labs, you're quite right. There were high tech guns, but of course they really were designed only to immobilise people. They weren't actually useful for blowing locks off, which of course I think Jane discovers in one episode. And the military and the rich had them instead of so there was a technological progression. So poorer people had simpler tech, which kind of sort of makes sense. And there was a retro laser pistol in one episode, wasn't there? So they did have some lasers about. And Chris Viking says, I heard that you don't actually need to do anything special to fire a modern gun in space because cartridges contain their own oxidizer. I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I don't know enough about. I haven't made a study of guns in space, but that may well be true actually, because if it's a sealed container, maybe it doesn't need atmospheric oxygen to fire. I don't know. Lack of oxygen for the bullet explosion. So there's another thing. Okay, so going back to the modern Battlestar Galactica, in that they dispense with lasers, I think entirely, pretty much from my recollection, and they go back to kind of munitions, which again is quite good. They seem to have effectively very, very high-powered multi-cannons on their fighters, which effectively are destroying enemy ships by ripping into them. So rather than the kind of laser blasters, you have kind of these kind of almost like an A10 tank buster kind of gun on the Vipers, and the Galactica itself has missile launchers and anti-missile kind of flak cannons and stuff like that, which is they're firing actual physical stuff at each other rather than using lasers a lot of the time. So that's quite good. So fires can't burn the oxygen-free vacuum of space, no, but guns can shoot. Modern ammunition does contain its own oxidizer chemical that will trigger the explosion of gunpowder, and that's the fire of the bullet wherever you are in the universe. No atmospheric oxygen. Okay, so you can fire those kind of weapons in space. Well, that's interesting. So that makes them a lot more practical, doesn't it? So a burning gunpowder produces oxygen, which is why it expands so quickly. Okay. The Russians literally put an anti-aircraft cannon on their space station and test fired it. Okay, well, good for the Russians. I suppose a gun in space does have the problems of recoil, particularly if it's on a platform or a space station or something. That must be quite interesting to fire. So there's the thing. So Battlestar Galactica the reimagined version was quite good in that sense, as it had the guns seemed to be a little bit more thought through, but they're all munition based, and that seems to be a theme that's continued on. The other thing, and we talked about this before, the other thing that Battlestar Galactica did is they fired nukes at each other, which is an interesting thing in space. Now, nobody, as far as I know, has detonated a nuke in space. I think it's obviously banned by the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, so it would be very illegal, excuse me, to do so. But the thing about a nuke is that it's mostly effective on the ground because there's an atmosphere for it to push against. So when a nuke goes off, you have this huge initial expansion and lots of heat, but of course almost immediately that hits the atmosphere surrounding the nuclear explosion, and then you get a shock wave which is travelling at very, very high speed, and then a blast of heat and radiation. Well, the radiation and the heat hits you first, and then the shock wave, which does most of the damage, to be honest, is travelling through the atmosphere. Now, if you detonate a nuke in space, there is no medium for that shockwave to travel through, so there is no shockwave. All you get is a blast of energy, X-rays and neutrons and all sorts of unpleasant stuff, but there's no shockwave. So if your nuke is detonated against the hull of a ship, then I think it probably would do some damage, because there's an awful lot of heat and energy, and as the concept says, EMF, electromagnetic radiation stuff. Okay, pumping out there, that would probably not do you any good. It would probably irradiate the crew really badly at point blank range. But if you detonated a nuke some way off, and let's assume the ship has some sort of radiation shielding, then I don't see it really doing a great deal at all, because there's no shockwave. The only problem you have is some heat. Now, the heat and the radiation goes down by the inverse square law. So if you move twice as far away, the radiation from the nuke is 4 times less, and so on and so forth. So a nuke, unlike on Earth, where a nuke is dangerous at many kilometers away because of the shockwave, in space I don't see nukes being all that viable, because unless you detonate one right on top of your opponent, they just need to have decent radiation shield, and they'll be absolutely fine. So I don't know. I mean, I'll bow to people with greater scientific knowledge on that one, but the whole idea of let's fire a nuke at it. Nukes need atmospheres to be deadly, and if if there isn't an atmosphere, then the nuke isn't going to quite do so much. So that one's quite interesting. So I don't know, that one's interesting. The other one is now that brings us on to the modern stuff with things like the Expanse. Now, the Expanse is I think is probably one of the best, most well thought through space combat things, and we talked about the Expanse before. Now, if you haven't seen it, go watch it, because it is probably the most realistic portrayal of what space combat would actually be like, and it's all short range stuff. It's relatively short range stuff, other than when I say short range, I'm talking thousands and thousands of kilometers still. I'm not talking about hundreds of meters. So the thing with the Expanse is it's all back down to missiles and kind of multi-cannon type weapons. Okay, so if you want to attack another ship, you have to fire a missile at it, and a missile is basically a very I don't even know if the missiles in the Expanse actually need warheads in them. I think they just rely on kinetic energy to do damage, because if your impact speed is high enough, whether you're carrying a warhead doesn't really matter. You're going to cause an awful lot of damage. The formula for energy is half mv squared, isn't it? I think is that right? Half mv squared. So if you increase the mass of your projectile, it goes up by the same factor as the amount of mass you add. But if you increase the velocity of your projectile, it goes up by the square of the velocity. So it's far better to have a relatively light missile that's going very, very fast, rather than a fairly chunky missile that's only travelling at a relatively lower speed. So what you have in the Expanse is just you fire missiles at each other, and the missiles attempt to home in on your ship. And because it's space, the missiles can just orientate themselves and head in your general direction. So the only option you have as a defensive ship is two. One is get out of the way, which requires you to do a very, very unpleasant high G maneuver. Or the second one is to basically use your defensive mechanisms, kind of multi-cannon rounds, to sort of produce a level of flak in the environment, whereas the missile gets hit and either destroyed into sparkling small pieces, or is knocked off course, and so it doesn't hit you. So it's a lot of the fighting is very much like that, and all the ships in the Expanse are basically built with the idea that they're basically built around one great big engine on the ship, which is capable of some very, very high G acceleration, and to get around the problems of the people on board, which is very clever on the Expanse actually, is that they've thought about that. So everyone obviously is in a seat and strapped into place to cope with that, so that helps. Everybody's injected with some weird and wacky drugs that help them cope with the high accelerations. And the other part of it, which I thought was very, very clever, is, and unlike any other space show that I can think of actually, is that when they go into combat, or when they're in the sphere of combat, or they suspect they're going to be in the sphere of combat, they evacuate all of the atmosphere from inside the ship, at least in the livable sections, and everybody jumps into a spacesuit. The idea being that if the ship is holed, which they anticipate that it probably is going to be holed, the ship doesn't experience a massive decompression because it's already a vacuum on the inside. If you're unlucky enough to get hit by a round in your spacesuit, then clearly you're dead. But that's only you. So if the ship's got lots and lots of crew members, the chance of all of them being hit by the rounds from the incoming fire are reduced, so the ship can still operate even if the ship has got lots and lots of holes in it. Now I thought that was a really, really good bit of thinking, and that feels to me, if you were going into a war situation with that kind of technology, that sort of feels like the sort of thing that you probably would do. And then at the end of the battle, you'd have to figure out where all the holes in your ship were and go around and patch them up before you ran out of oxygen in your spacesuit. So that sort of stuff is actually quite well thought. They only evacuate the air on the smaller ships. Okay, so I don't know my Expanse detail too much, but that to me feels like quite a good mechanism for dealing with some of the complexities of space combat. The other thing that they do is that they don't have the bridge of the ship right at the front exposed with a big sign above it going, "Here's the bridge." like on the Enterprise. I mean, most spaceships have really, really stupid designs in that sense, that the command and control center is visible at the top of the ship when it no longer needs to be. So really the command and control center should be at the center of the ship, where there's many decks and there's many armor plating bits and pieces between the enemy and you. So Star Wars and Star Trek are absolutely awful at this, because they put the bridge on a very, very exposed section, either on the top of the saucer or on the Star Destroyers. There's a big X thing at the back of the ship saying, "This is where you should be targeting. This is where we are." And the Klingons actually in Star Trek are even worse. They put their command and control center on the end of a spindly pod at the front of their ship. It always makes me laugh, the Star Trek ship designs, because like, how easy would it be to damage these ships? All you need to do with the Klingons is concentrate all your firepower in that little bit on the deck, just chop the ship off. And they played around with that in Star Trek in the latest films, where they chop the warp engines off, don't they? Which is quite funny. So so that one's quite interesting. So I think the Expanse has really thought about the mechanics of ship conflict, which is quite good. So the Enterprise is quite bad. Is the bridge on the Rocket Ant? Is it on the top? I mean, maybe it's a design constraint for various things. Maybe you have to look out sometimes. I don't know where it is. And the design of the ships in terms of the way they operate. So I mean, I think you can pick holes and all sorts of things. The problem, at least I think with the Expanse, they've thought about it from a kind of this ship has to fight. There's a few little nice scenes in The Expanse where the ship rolls as well when it's using its multi-cannons to make sure that any individual gun has a chance to reload as the ship's rolling, so that as it comes back into the line of fire, it's ready to fire again. And little things like that are kind of like that's quite tactical nods to the sort of stuff that a good commander of a spaceship would do in order to make sure his ship was still as effective as possible. Lucky Luigi, yes, you're quite right. There is usually a battle bridge, but the problem with the battle bridge is they never ever use it, do they? Apart from very, very rare occasions. And it's like, by the time they've gone, shall we go to the battle bridge? Then it's already too late. So I'm not sure the idea of a bridge that can drive the ship in a war footing. Maybe there's protocols in Star Trek for when you go to the battle bridge and when you don't. I'm not sure. You can't suddenly, right, actually things are getting pretty bad, let's go to the battle bridge. That doesn't sound like a tactic that's going to work, does it? You have to start off in the battle bridge if you think it's going to be a pretty bad thing. And then if you have a battle bridge, why isn't that the bridge? Especially in the 24th century or whatever it happens to be. And we still have them in Elite, yeah. So actually, this is interesting because I've gone and researched all the previous games, as you know, in some depth, and having a transparent cockpit in Elite didn't happen before Elite Dangerous. Prior to that, it was always a vision screen inside the ship, so the ship's hull was totally solid. There was no cockpit per se for the vast majority of the ships. Including the Cobra Mark III. So the idea of having a transparent cockpit is pretty much an Elite Dangerous only thing, which is interesting. Now it's done for the aesthetics, which so we can look out of the windows. But actually having a window on a spaceship, it's a really, really bad idea unless you actually need to have one. Some of the big problems of the space shuttle were down to the fact that because you had to land it as an airplane, you had to be able to see out. But having a transparent part of the hull like that, it makes it far less strong than the rest of the ship. And airplane designs have the same thing, putting cabin windows in airplanes, because it effectively weakens the structure of the airplane. So you have to put in all sorts of considerations in order to make the rest of the airplane strong enough to support the fact that you've deliberately weakened it by putting windows into it. So windows are not a good thing for a spaceship. If you don't have to have windows, so much the better. So all those sort of things. In real life, protected places in warships from which the crew could operate the ship, and of course, because the ship sinks, then you have to go down with the ship, which is not great. You don't want to be in that situation. So all sorts of things you have to play around with these kind of things. So. Depending on what you're kind of going for, the aesthetic you're after. So, as a writer, the thing is to obviously try and be consistent. Now, if your space guns have recoil, then fair enough. It depends what vibe you're going for. I quite like the ones where they basically go, actually, the high tech stuff doesn't work. One thing I did like, the other show that we haven't mentioned yet, Babylon 5, where the Earth weapons appear to be sort of laser bolty, whereas when they do the Earth Minbari war, the Minbari weapons appear to be way more powerful. They're sort of like beam weapons that just slice through the Earth ships very, very easily. And sometimes there's that tension between different technology levels, which I think is quite fun to play with as well. I remember a live stream with Sandro where he couldn't appear to grasp the idea of a ship without viewports and windows for the pilots. He hasn't watched enough science fiction shows. So in most aircraft accident reconstructions, they can see the tears in the metal running from the window along the edge and length of the fuselage. So that's the thing. That's one of the reasons. Obviously, many of you will have flown on airplanes. One of the reasons why the vast majority of the windows on the side of the plane are round is it's to limit the stress. If you had a square window, the stress would be much, much greater at the corners. So one of the reasons why the cabin windows on an airplane are rounded is to reduce the stress on the fuselage. So have a think about that next time you're sitting in the window seat 35,000 feet up in the air and you realise there's 1 atmosphere of pressure on one side of that piece of glass and there's virtually no pressure on the other side, and there's just a few thin sheets of glass or whatever it is between you and an almost complete vacuum. And then you'll probably go to the aisle seat. Not that it makes a great deal of difference, but you know what I mean. So little things like that. Windows are a bad idea on a spaceship. I'm sure if we ever do end up with spaceships in space that end up fighting each other, there won't be windows. You'll do it with cameras and stuff like that. And the nice thing about cameras is you can embed them into other things, and you could probably cover your ship with cameras and have all sorts of views of different things. You wouldn't have blind spots in the traditional sense. They could be susceptible to being jammed, of course, or disrupted, or just shot down. One of the problems you may have in the future is actually, the cameras being targeted and destroyed, so you can't actually see out. That could be a viable tactic. Someone should have told the builders of the glass bridge in China where a number of the floor panels shattered. Oh dear, doesn't even bear thinking about, does it? Plane windows are just rip-along perforations. So there are all sorts of problems with that sort of thing. So handguns in science fiction are tend to follow westerns in space. Either kind of like handguns, and you can have that traditional kind of sort of standoff type affair where you're shooting at each other. They tend to be quite stuck in the past. So modern warfare, when you have snipers and very accurate weapons over a long distance, which is very much possible with modern weaponry, never seems to find a place in science fiction. You do get the occasional snipers, but it's I suppose because it's sort of seen as a bit unsporting, and if your hero gets gunned down at range, you don't even see the assassin because they're really, really good and they're hiding behind a rock half a kilometre away. It's a bit dull, I suppose, but it's certainly not very realistic that you don't embrace the capabilities of modern warfare. It's the same with the ship-to-ship combat when you have the kind of airplanes in space stuff like Star Wars. Is that a modern aircraft can engage multiple targets way out of visual range, possibly sometimes even over the horizon. So actually, if an X-wing ended up in a battle on the Earth, I would probably put money on our traditional air forces to be able to shoot them down before they did any damage, because we can engage them with missiles at really, really long range. We don't actually have to get up close and personal with an X-wing, like the X-wings seem to have to do to shoot things down. And I don't know what the atmospheric capabilities of an X-wing are, but I'd put money on a modern US or UK or European fighter to actually have quite a good go at an X-wing, because it can engage it from long range and just run away. So I don't know. A lot of it is done for the fact that close quarter combat is more dramatic, at least to most audiences, I suspect. Whereas, of course, is that what space combat would really be like? Probably not. Particularly between spacecraft, because there isn't. One of the things that you always get wrong in space is, of course, it's very, very, very difficult to be stealthy in space, because you can't hide in the traditional way in space, because your heat will give you away. It's very easy to spot a spacecraft moving around, because it gives off a stack load of heat against the background of space, which is, of course, very, very cold indeed. So that sort of stuff is problematic. With today's technology, we could detect the space shuttle easily operating at the range of Saturn, for example. It would be dead easy to spot, because the space shuttle exhaust. In fact, the space shuttle just maintaining an atmosphere for human beings aboard at the range of Saturn would be visible to radio telescopes on Earth, because when things are hot, they give off radio waves, and radio waves are easily detectable by radio telescopes. Now that's how actually we discovered that the temperature on Venus was much higher than we hoped it would be. So because the planet was giving off massive radio waves, and the only explanation for it, as they discovered in the 60s, was the planet was at a ridiculously high temperature. So we knew that the temperature of Venus was way higher than Earth long before we sent a spaceship there, because it was giving off radio waves because of its high temperature. And a spaceship, if it's maintaining a comfortable room temperature environment aboard it, let's say 20 degrees Celsius, is way hotter than a frozen moon out near the orbit of Saturn. So it's going to show up. It's no way you can hide. The only way to hide is not be in the line of sight of the observer. So you can hide behind something, that will work. So all those sort of things are slightly problematic. So the idea of running cold in space doesn't work, because in order to make it cold enough for you not to be visible, everybody on board would be dead. Which is stealth, but it's not very good stealth. Okay. So a sniper's operational range would also depend on the size of the planet. So if you're firing on a low G planet, you can fire farther, or something where there isn't very thick atmosphere as well. So a bullet on Mars, actually, that would be quite interesting, because the gravity there is only 0.3 of the Earth, and the atmospheric density is very low. So you would be able to shoot at a much longer range on Mars than on Earth, because there's very much less air resistance and there's less gravity. So is the sniper range, so 3.5 kilometers for a sniper shot. So your hero crew sets down on an outpost planet, and they're merrily marching into town, and they're like 3 miles away, 2 miles away from town, and they all get gunned down. So what happened? We got sniped. It was as simple as that. We're dead. Okay, it's the end of the story. Now that doesn't make for a great story, does it? But you could embrace the fact that sort of stuff can happen. Argon Labs, you have to make a way to make the hull cold as space. So that's tricky. How do you make the hull of a ship cold and keep the interior warm? You need something that doesn't conduct energy. Now that also doesn't work. Now I've delved into this one a bit as well. That also doesn't work, unfortunately, unless the hull can also block radio waves. Because if you have a hot thing inside a cold thing, so externally, you can't read the temperature of the hot thing on the inside. So there's no heat coming out, and the exterior is cold. You won't pick up the temperature, so that's good. But unfortunately, the hot thing inside the cold thing, it sounds like baked Alaska. The hot thing inside the cold thing will still be giving off radio waves. So even if you can't detect a temperature increase, you can still detect the radio waves from the hot thing inside the cold thing, unless the cold thing can not also be a perfect insulator, but it can also block radio waves as well. Now the problem with blocking radio waves inside a spaceship is there's now no way for anyone to communicate with you. So there's all sorts of problems here which can't easily be solved. Low Earth Orbit has been popping in to say hello. It's been watching another stream, so that's good. No, good for that. So they have some very advanced scopes currently that can estimate where the shot will fall if you have windage range. So I'm sure they could adjust for gravity. So so modern weapons actually are way in advance of most sci-fi weapons, which is quite funny. Basically your air superiority fighters can engage multiple targets outside of visual range. I'd never seen that happen with any Star Wars weaponry, other than things like the Death Star, obviously. The sniper technology and things like that, as Chris Viking and others have been alluding to, is way better. So I think our current Earth armies actually should wipe the floor with most sci-fi armies, unless they've got silly things like shields and sorts of stuff like that, because they can just engage them out of range. So you can just imagine the AT-ATs and the AT-STs all coming down on the surface with the troops, and all the troops are kind of running forwards, and then it just all gets sniped and missiled out of existence from miles and miles away because they didn't anticipate long range attacks. So there's a curious technological gulf in a lot of science fiction because it's based on World War II style combat. To make it kind of engaging, I suppose more accessible. So when people think of, dogfighting, I suppose is what it would be in aircraft mode. Modern planes don't really do dogfighting because, if you get into visual range, the speeds that modern aircraft are travelling, they're capable of, way past the speed of sound. The chances of you hanging on the tail of somebody trying to fire away, at the speed of sound, or twice the speed of sound. I mean, the G-forces are just impossible to start with, but the amount of time you're in the same vicinity in weapons range of that kind of weapon is very, very, very small. So you're engaging each other with electronics and missiles at long range. And that's where I think the Expanse and things like it get better, because it's more that sort of slightly tactical gameplay. Where is the enemy? Where is he going to be? How can we bracket him with enough ordnance to deal with him? And what countermeasures would he deploy when so what's our strategy? So that's the sort of stuff that happens in the Expanse, which I think in some ways is better. So that's forward-thinking sci-fi. It sort of embraces modern thinking about how weaponry in space would work. So all that sort of stuff I think is quite cool. Coming back to your writing then. so what do you do now? I think you have to basically choose in advance. What kind of story are you telling? Are you telling something where you just really want to do more sort of Star Wars-y stuff? Because an awful lot of people don't care how the technology works, okay, and sometimes quite rightly too. They just want to be amused and they just want to have some pew pew, okay. So and pew pew is fun, right? Shooting people and they duck behind things and things explode and laser beams going all the place. That's quite fun. It has been done before. So if that's where you want to go, be aware of that it's kind of something that has been done before. If you want to go hard science fiction or kind of military sci-fi, I suppose in some ways some people would call it, then you need to pay a little bit more attention to the weapons and make it a bit more plausible. So things like heat dissipation and reload and recoil and all the negative effects of using munitions in space is something that's probably worth considering, because you can probably get some quite interesting tense tactical scenarios out of that. One thing I always liked about the Wrath of Khan sequence in Star Trek was that sort of submarine type warfare vibe that was going on in Star Trek. And Star Trek vessels are very submarine-y in the way they work. It's kind of all sneaking about to try and get the best angle and then launching torpedoes in the right direction. It's very submarine-y. Or submarinary. Is that right? Not sure if those are words. So that sort of stuff is different. But and the Expanse has shown us a way of doing space combat which isn't the classic airplanes in space, which of course isn't realistic at all. That sort of stuff is different as well. And the interesting thing is the good writing. One of the things I found, going back to my kind of Elite Dangerous writing, one of the things I found with trying to write a space battle is actually really quite hard, because and I've talked about point of view before. When you write a space battle, you've got to decide where you're showing the action from. So are you sitting in a pilot's seat in a ship? Okay, and if you're sitting in the pilot's seat in a ship, then you have to describe what is happening from the perspective of that pilot. Okay, now at certain times the enemy vessel, let's say, may be out of visual shot and you basically lost it. So you can't describe what the enemy ship is doing in that scenario because the pilot of your ship can't see it. So you can't do a case of the enemy ship pulled in behind and started unleashing its beam laser, because the pilot can't see that until he gets hit by it, and then all he knows is that his shields are going down. So you've got to be careful of the POV of those kind of things. That's one thing that is quite easy to get wrong. The second one is the whole mechanics of space combat, because it basically, what's happening in space combat is you're rolling and pitching and yawing and firing your guns and probably speeding up and slowing down a bit. That's pretty much all you're really doing. And I must admit, I struggled. Other people may not have a problem with this, but I struggled writing a scene of space combat because it was all bank left, bank right, pull up, dive, turn left, turn right, spin on your axis, shoot the guns. It was kind of like, this is really boring. Being in a space combat situation is quite exciting, and that's why we like playing games and watching films. But trying to write space combat when you're just describing the mechanics of what's actually happening to the ship you're in is actually rather dull. So I gave up on that approach and thought, well, I'm going to, what I fortunately had in Elite Dangerous was I had effectively a passenger on the ship in the form of Salome, who didn't know anything about space combat before she actually got involved in one. And so I was describing space combat from a kind of rookie experience. So all she's getting is vertigo and stomach clenching fear and strange noises and explosions and jolts and rattles and then flashes and lights and bangs and not knowing whether or not she's alive or dead and whether she's about to die. That was more interesting to write from a kind of writing perspective. The other thing that was actually far better from writing in terms of the storytelling was all of the stuff that happens before the fight. Okay, so all the kind of, is that enemy ship lining up to attack us? Is that, why is he in that attitude? Is he, he's turned towards us? Is that threatening, or is that just coincidence? All that sort of tense will he, won't they kind of moment. His shields are up, his hard points are deployed, all those sort of things. But he hasn't opened fire yet. Is he tailing us? Is he not tailing us? Is that a missile he's locked on target? How would we know? All that sort of, I'm not sure what's going on here. That creates quite a lot of tension. That's quite good for the writing. So all of those sorts of things fit into tools that you can use as a writer to make your space scene more interesting. My recommendation would certainly don't be just do the ship banked to the left, the ship banked to the right, the ship pulled up, the ship dived, the ship spun around and fired its guns. It's because in your brain you're kind of going, okay, left, and then it's gone right, and then it's gone up, and it's gone down. It's quite hard to track. So maybe take a look at World War II battleship combat. Battleship combat again is quite good. A lot of the tactical positioning and all that sort of stuff is actually where the tension lies. The actual engagement is in some ways the boring bit because it's kind of almost just a slugging match by that point. But trying to get the upper hand in the first place is actually much, much more interesting. Stand up, sit down, fight. That's right, all that sort of stuff. So, space battles are best told from I think, a very personal perspective. I found it worked really, really well to tell it from the perspective of a rookie on the ship, a passenger on the ship, who hadn't been in space combat before, because it was just, as far as she was concerned, it was spinny, whirly sickness, really, really uncomfortable, unpleasant experience. Now, if your antagonist, your protagonist, is a seasoned space dog and knows what they're doing, then maybe the way you describe it would be quite different. But I would take it from a very personal perspective at that point in time in the story, to give it more kind of emotional clout with the reader. So the technical positioning is the interesting bit, I think. On the Harrington, so that's a good example of all the tactical stuff. So getting your ship into a place where it's got an advantage before the guns open fire, because there's lots of examples of good writing where an inferior ship wins because it's got a better tactical position for whatever reason. And then when you create your sci-fi universe, having different weapons that have different capabilities and different classes of ships and all those kind of things, you can have lots of fun with that. One game that I particularly like that did this really, really well is the Homeworld series. So if you haven't played Homeworld, I thoroughly recommend that. It's a sort of real-time strategy game, but kind of in space, in 3 dimensions. And the 3 dimensions gives it a bit of an edge. But the other thing about it is nice is the various different ship classes. So you have small fighters which can deal with other fighters. You have bombers which can deal huge damage to capital ships, but if they come across another fighter, are just toast because they get ripped to shreds because they're not manoeuvrable. The capital ships are vulnerable to the bombers, but they can have anti-bomber defences, and also can deploy fighters to shield them from that. Some of the most powerful capital ships have huge guns, but the guns are so big that they can't be steered independently of the ship. So if the ship can't turn fast enough to get something in target, it's effectively unable to fire. So lots and lots of tactical things like that. So if you have a big heavy ship with a massive gun that can't steer, you have to surround it with less capable ships that have lots of anti-defensive guns and all that sort of stuff. So those sort of things, where you have a ship that's devastatingly powerful in one way, but has a massively exploitable weakness if it's caught on its own, is a thing you can use for good tension effects. If you've got the big gun ship and you get separated from the rest of your escort fleet, that's a big problem for you, because now your gun may be entirely useless because you're facing off against, let's say, 3 very, very small manoeuvrable ships that can slowly peck you to death. And there's nothing you can do about it because you don't have any fighter escort and things like that. So, real battles have been won and lost because of those sort of tactics. So I'd certainly recommend things like that in your science fiction, your space opera, to give the tension of that kind of thing. I like Homeworld style combo, but it is also very World War II tactics. Yes, it was. It's kind of rock paper scissors. It is a bit, but it's quite a useful thing to have as a background there. And Homeworld, yeah. So Homeworld, I should do actually. Maybe we'll do that as a retro stream at some point. That'd be quite good. We count 30 ships, 30 rebel ships, Lord Vader. They're so small, so that's quite good. So the Space Dock videos on YouTube are very good at these kind of things. So and there's lots of things like that you can exploit as resources for a writer to go and have a think about. In my Shadewood series, we didn't really have any ship-to-ship combat in much of the case, but what we did have in there was the vast majority of the technology in Shadewood was kind of feudal level with wooden warships and swords and bows and arrows and things. But you had a few outliers in the sense that you had one ship, which actually the heroes have, the Mobilus, which is actually nothing more than a relatively small fishing trawler, really. But because it's a powered vessel, and it's made of metal, it's basically the dreadnought of that world, because there is nothing else like it. It can retreat or not from a battle should it wish to, because it's powered. It's not relying on wind, and it's made of metal. So if it does hit you in a collision with a wooden vessel, the wooden vessel comes off quite a lot worse. So from a technological perspective, it's a lot further ahead than the wooden vessels, and yet it's just a very, very simple kind of fishing trawler, really. But it has power, which means it's got a massive technological advantage. And sometimes having that technological edge between your factions, which Babylon 5 did with Earth and Minbari, can make for a very interesting conflict, because it may be that this super high tech side of the world doesn't have that much reach. It doesn't have that many vessels, whereas maybe the lower tech society has far more vessels, but they're individually far less capable. There's another one you can play around with as well. So that's quite good. So there's all sorts of stuff like that you can play around with. And in terms of the personal weapons, I think I quite like the Star Trek phases, but they don't seem very plausible. I think the idea of actually having low-tech guns in space may actually be the way it works, particularly now that, as people have explained on the stream, you can fire them in a vacuum. So a normal handgun will work. It's still just as lethal, unless you've got some sort of armor plating, as it will be on Earth. So a handgun, it's a low-tech solution to the problem. You don't need to have the complexities of a laser gun when a handgun is sufficiently lethal. Particularly if you're in an environment where it's you're operating, let's say, in a hostile atmosphere, and you're having to wear a spacesuit, or there's a vacuum outside. If you can fire a gun in that situation, it's absolutely completely lethal because, even if you don't manage to kill the person, if you spring a leak in their spacesuit, they're dead as well. So so maybe handguns, just traditional hand weapons, are have a very long life in terms of space combat because they're still sufficiently lethal in that environment. So I think maybe Firefly and the Expanse and Battlestar Galactica, the reimagined one, that makes a lot of sense, because why reinvent something that still works unless there's any advantage to it. And the bullet is a long-range weapon. I suppose that's another thing, isn't it? Conservation of momentum is if you fire a gun at somebody in 0G, then the bullet is just going to stay on that trajectory, isn't it? So your sniping range, as long as you can fire accurately, would be effectively almost infinite with a with a bullet in space. So all that sort of stuff is quite good. So I don't know. So it'd be interesting to see. But you can play around with those sort of things as a writer, I think, and there's plenty to play with. So I think we've moved away from kind of laser guns and blasters and things in modern science fiction for that reason. Is that people have realised that actually, simple. I use the word simple. Tech that exists today is sufficiently lethal and would work well enough in alien environments and in space to not need a great deal of improvement. It's quite interesting to come around. So Isaac Newton is that's the only problem you'd have if you were in 0G, is if you fired a gun. It would be quite an effective propulsive device, wouldn't it? Because if you're firing a gun at somebody, you would recoil away from them, which would be quite funny. So maybe we'll see sort of that sort of thing. So it's food for thought. Food for thought, I think, is the thing there, is with with this sort of things. And it depends very much what you're trying to do with your story. Is do the weapons matter that much? Your Star Wars, for example, is the weapons very, very, they're part of the culture of the universe. They're not so random and clumsy as a blaster. A more civilized weapon for a more civilized age. All that sort of stuff. It's in the dialogue. It's all part of the background. And different cultures, like the Jedi, have weapons that they consider to be the ones that they use. And I think as long as you work out your rules, then I think you're okay. Now, I did the same thing in Shadewood, is that the priestesses have what they call a kai, which is basically a staff. It's a metal staff 5 foot long. And it's basically a two-handed staff that they use as a weapon, and that's their signature weapon that distinguishes them. And sometimes having a weapon that is unique to a culture or a group of people is quite a powerful thing. You've seen that in Star Wars with the lightsaber, and you tend to see it in Star Wars also with the blaster. Tends to be a more kind of average weapon, so anybody can own a blaster and fire it, but if you've got a lightsaber, you have to learn how to use it, and you have to be a Jedi in order to master it. And in Shadewood, the kai is unique to the priestesses. Nobody else uses it, so it's very much a kind of, you see one of those, a priestess is around, and that as a writer can be quite a useful thing as well. So that's all sort of stuff. So there we go. Did early astronauts actually use a pistol for thrust vectoring? I don't know actually. I suppose it would work. And the Klingon, the Batleth thing, I mean, how practical that would be to actually kill people with, I'm not quite sure. But, that is Star Trek trying to add that sort of sense of ownership and cultural significance to a weapon, which is quite a good thing, I think. Trying to make those sort of things make sense. Curved swords. So I mean, you do have sabers. Do have some curved swords. I mean, I've done sword training with some swords. All the swords I've dealt with are straight, however. It's so that's but they're interesting, different cultures, and I must admit, in the Elite Dangerous universe, I introduced sword play as a big thing in the Imperials, because it felt appropriate that they would have that sort of symbolic, almost ceremonial aspect to their society, where being able to handle a sword was a mark of honour, that distinguish you from the federal scum who just mucked about with technology. So you can use those things to culturally separate your races or your organisations, give them slightly different flavours. So getting a view of the weapons that a culture or a group of people use in your stories is a way to differentiate them as well. And if you can, that's an important point really in terms of writing, is if you can differentiate between groups of people by giving them an identity which is quite recognisable to the reader, that will help. That's why in Elite Dangerous, the Federation is one way inclined and the Imperials have a very different design ethic and outlook. That's quite good background lore because it quickly differentiates between the two. And then it's us and them, isn't it? And it's quite nice. Imps carrying swords and fence wielding clubs, yeah. So to summarise, what have we learned? So I mean, space weaponry is an odd thing. A lot of what we think would work probably won't work. A lot of what we suspect might not have worked actually possibly will. So again, as a writer, choose what you want to use. The key thing I think nowadays, particularly, I think people have got more discerning in the last few years and perhaps last decade, whereas we'd be quite happy to accept blasters and things like that. In a lot of science fiction now, we're a little bit more actually want a little bit more thought given to it. In the olden days, it was all just pew pew and ships that went, whereas now we know that that's not how it works. We're a little bit more enlightened as an audience. We know how spaceships work. We see SpaceX going into space quite a lot, and we see those sort of things. We know a bit more about space now than we did back then, and so we expect our science fiction to be a bit more plausible, a little bit more well developed, in some cases anyway. So again, decide what you're trying to write and figure it in that way. So I like the a more elegant weapon for a more civilized age. Yep. Right, my friends, it is time. Once more, I've been waffling on for 2 hours as per usual. So thank you very much for your company. I have no idea what I'll be doing on Thursday because again it's Elite Dangerous, but we're in between that weird piece between releases. The alpha is closed and the Elite Dangerous Odyssey hasn't arrived yet. So, but I'm sure we'll find something to do. And on Saturday we continue with the retro games exploration of Frontier First Encounters, which actually we're getting quite near the end of, I think. As we play through those missions and cheat our way through to success, hopefully. But as always, thank you very much for your company. I will keep you advised on to any special guests that I have coming away, and sort of keep those sort of things in the frame for you so you know that they're coming. So, but if you've got writing questions, obviously feel free to chuck them into the stream at any point in time. I'm quite happy to do my best to answer them. So there we go. So you guys have a fantastic week ahead. I will look forward to seeing you on Thursday or Saturday or back here on Monday, of course. And look after yourselves. We seem to be slowly clawing our way out of COVID and stuff, so it'd be nice to actually start meeting people in the flesh once more. But obviously look after yourselves until such time as everything's in the clear. So be good. And thanks G-Edge for the comments about Nine Streams Consciousness. Very, very welcome as well. So don't wreck the golf. No, I won't wreck the golf. I'm still working on that, getting it better. And yes, carry on, be good, and I'll see you soon. Take care, my friends. Bye bye now.